Welcome back into the studio, everyone. You gorgeous lighthouses that you are. Again, we're going to have a conversation about how to keep our light shining brightly when we start to feel like we're dimming, right? When we're becoming those burnt out searchlights that we used to feel, and we're going into the same old patterns. The reason for this podcast is to continue to lift you up, repower your power station, and get you back to shining like the beautiful lighthouse you are. And especially today, my guest is my dear friend, Grainne O'Regan. She's got a beautiful accent, but what she also has is brilliant information for lighthouses, because she's all about helping women entrepreneurs primarily to be able to have that time flexibility we all desire, along with the financial freedom. That is the whole reason we got into business in the first place. She is a noted global speaker, and she brings into business her mindset coaching to make it that much easier for all of us to be successful. And as I like to say, make more sales, enjoy more satisfaction, and achieve more success by shining our light on others. Grainne, it is wonderful to have you here in the studio with me. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Stacey. And it's so nice to be with another lighthouse, helping other women to shine their light as well.
Absolutely. And you do that so well, helping other women be more brilliant and articulate their brilliance. But I'm going to ask you a question that I know our audience thinks about all the time, which is, why is it so much harder for most than it needs to be to grow a business? What do you think is the reason for that?
Hmm. I think it's such a good question because I think a lot of women, and look, we see the highlight reel, Stacey, and are people, creating phenomenal growth 100%. But I think there can be stages, especially for the women who are in the messy middle of growth, or they've gotten to a stage where, and I'm sure you've probably felt this yourself, Stacey, you get to a level and you feel like, okay, I'm here. I've got it all figured out. And just when you have it figured out, it feels like things start to fall apart. Or like, I love how you said it earlier, that maybe your light gets a little bit dimmed, and I'm looking at the light here behind me, or your light starts to flicker, it starts to get uncomfortable. And what I see with so many women is that they get to a stage where it feels like they've built it on a lot of hustle, then they get into a rhythm, but somewhere along the way they start to lose what that light is for them, what it is about them. And I always talk about it's about articulating your brilliance, but it's continuously reminding yourself of that and coming back to that. Because when you're in the busyness of the growth, and I see that so often with women, they're breaking through monetary numbers, and we all have a number we want to hit, going back to that financial freedom number, and they're so focused on hitting a number that sometimes it's almost like they kind of drift away from themselves. And so it starts to feel harder maybe to show up, to market, to launch, to hit that next milestone, because there's almost this feeling of disconnection from themselves. And I think this is what I see with so many women, which is why a lot of the women who come to me are in that space. They can't quite put a finger on what it is. And then I'm able to help them figure out what that is, which I think 9 times out of 10, what I see with women is they become disconnected from their voice, their brilliance, or from themselves.
Yeah. Well, I love that you did bring up the disconnection part, because everybody here knows that in order to keep our light shining brightly, the lighthouse path helps us get back into alignment with ourselves. And alignment is connection with ourselves in order to turn that light on. But it's interesting. You and I have had a conversation about what is the point where it's important that we continue to share the same message, even if we start to get bored with it, versus it's time to change the message. Okay, because that can be part of the reason women entrepreneurs check out. They're tired of sharing their message. before the audience has actually even heard it, right? So can you address that for us?
Yeah, I love that question, Stacey. And I think this is where I think the disconnection can come in, because when we set out, we're all fired up and we have that innate passion. And I don't think we ever lose that. I think it just gets, we go into the dark room as such. I'm going to use a lot of light analogy here as we're talking about lighthouses. And I think, especially, I think, depending on if you are your ideal client, which a lot of us are, that you move forward and you progress and you evolve, which we all do. And we're always on a path of evolving. But you can get disconnected from where your ideal client is. And as you rightly said, your dreamy ideal client may not have met you or heard you or seen you, etc., whether that's online, in person, wherever it is you're doing your marketing. And you can get bored of it. And I think there's two things. I think sometimes people can get bored of it and start to switch up their message because they're disconnected from it, but then they get disconnected from their audience. And I had an example of this with a client recently. Like, I've known this client for over 4 years. I've worked with her on and off for 2 years. She was the passion, the fire in her belly was so clear on who it is she's supporting, what it is she's supporting them with. She had her framework, like, before any of the rest of us had thought about what our framework was. Like, she was niche from the beginning. But in the past year, she drifted and she broadened. And I don't always like using the word niche, but she broadened who she was speaking to, and she started to evolve, but she evolved further than her audience. And what happened was she lost her voice in her messaging. She was sold out in her one-to-one, but when it came to her group offer, which is the one she talks about a lot in her front-end marketing, she couldn't show up. She even hired team, Stacey, and she wasn't able to delegate the messaging and the content. It all sounded samey. It all sounded like AI. She was getting so frustrated. And it was when somebody said to her at an in-person event, and they said to her, yeah, I love your content, but I'm still not sure about what you do and who you actually help. Well, the light bulb went off in her head. That was it. She came to me and she was like, I'm done. This is it. I have to get back to who I am. So we went back to her foundations, her story, but the turning point in her story that, was the reason for her business, the specific problem, the specific person. And within days, she'd shifted her messaging and it was attracting more of her dreamy ideal clients. When she was finding it hard to show up for, I'm going to say, a couple of months. But when she made that shift back to who she is, connection with herself first, but then she was able to connect with her dreamy ideal client. They were in her audience, Stacey. They were waiting for her to speak. It's just she had lost her voice. So I think sometimes we know what it is, we've just moved away from it. And then there are some women who aren't quite sure what it is and they need to go deeper. So yeah, that's what I have experienced myself and that I've seen in clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you told a story, because I'm sure there are many people who have been in that situation. And I call it playing, exploring, and discovering. Sometimes it is important, right, to go, maybe this isn't working, whatever. And then you discover that you just weren't staying planted on your lighthouse spot as firmly, as consistently, as dependably as people want. I always go, I'm leading to a question for you. In the meantime, to continue on this path, I say to my clients, if you think about your favorite singer, so Grainne, who's your favorite singer or band?
My favorite band is the Stone Roses.
Okay. And what's your favorite song from that band?
Ooh, I'm going to say it's 10 Story Love Song.
Okay. And how many times do you think they play that when they're on the road in a concert? Like, do you think they have to play that every time they play a concert?
100%.
100%. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how bored they are. Like, they could do it in their sleep. They probably do. But if they don't sing that song that made them famous, right? The audience is going to feel gypped.
Absolutely.
Completely gypped. And that's what I say is what you're saying is stop throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You probably haven't said it long enough. And Grainne can help you be able to be clear whether it's clear enough to be said over and over and over again. So what I want to ask you is, what would be something that a woman entrepreneur right now who's in the spot that your client was, what would be the thing to ask themselves, or what would be the next exploration for them to ask themselves to get clear, to get back to connection with themselves and with their audience? What would you suggest?
Yeah, to listen to themselves and to listen to their audience. And I love that you use the analogy of music. And I think it's the listening part, going back to the growth part. I think when you're in that growth stage, you're kind of on this hamster wheel of growth, and you feel like you have to keep growing, keep being bigger, keep diversifying, where so often it's taking that space and time to just be still and to listen to, number one, your inner voice. And that client she knew what the problem was. But it was when I asked her a question about, are you enjoying speaking and talking about your current offer? And her simple answer was no, because it had drifted away from what she is known for. And then when we got back to listening to her voice, her story, and she got quite emotional. And I think it's getting back to that feeling and that going back to the groundedness of the lighthouse. And I think the other thing is asking yourself, have you moved on from your story, or do you need to go back to that part? For her, she needed to go back to that part. For other women, it may be they need to move on to the next part of their story. And I'll give myself as an example. I started off supporting women who were transitioning from corporate into entrepreneurship, because that's who I was. But then a couple of years in, Stacey, all the women who were coming to me had already moved into entrepreneurship. But they want to know, how was I doing everything? How was I being so visible? How was I being so articulate? And so I had to look at my story and go, okay, the part of my story that is in demand and that people want to know more about, it's still my story, isn't the beginning part, but it's more the messy middle part. So I needed to get quiet and listen and move into that part of my story. So I think it's listening to your inner voice and listening to your audience, the people who are in your DMs, the people who are at the summits or the in-person events or the online events, and what are they asking for? I had a really good example of this, a client who knew who she was talking to, kind of, knew what she was about, but there was one part of her story she'd never gone all in on. And guess what? Over the last couple of months, she's been getting so many people asking her about that, to speak about that. She's had people asking her about a free resource that she had not openly spoken about, but she'd commented about something and people asked her for it. So now she's like, this is the direction I want to go in. But she needed to stop and listen. And I think this is the part that when you're in growth, people find really uncomfortable, because they feel like, I have to keep pushing in order to find out what that clarity is, whereas the clarity actually comes to the listening to your inner voice, listening to your audience, and then connecting all of that with what you do and how you do it best. And those three things together, listening to all of that, is what's going to make you continue to stand out and continue to be the lighthouse, so the ships can come and you're attracting the right people.
Absolutely. And so now I think our audience is probably saying, okay, so where do I begin? And I'm going to direct us to the scroll that's happening beneath us. Mm-hmm. So that is a particular gift that you have, and I'd like you to describe it when people go to that link, which is also here in the written description. Grainne, what is it that they're going to get if they go to that link?
Yeah, so if you've been listening to this and you're like, but I've done the messaging work, I've done the work on my story, on my ideal client, all of it, but you're feeling that disconnection, I'm going to go deeper in this in my bundle. I have a masterclass where I talk about connection to you, to your client, to your approach, how you're different, so that you can reconnect with that. And also when you've done that, because I know when you have that, you're like fired up, and I'm like, how do I talk about this on socials? I've also included the hooks, the calls to action, and when you start getting all those people coming to you, how you can keep track of all the information that you're getting back, so you can continue to build up that lighthouse profile, I'm going to call it. And that's my 5x your sales messaging bundle, because this is what generates more sales. It's when it comes from you, your voice, your authentic self. That's when you attract in the dreamy ideal clients who are not just browsers, but who are buyers.
I completely agree, which is why I invited Grainne into the studio. It is a perfect complement to the Lighthouse Path Guide. For those of you who have been there and you're now like, so what's next? This could be the what's next for you, to take what you'd explored there into a deeper conversation. Grainne, thank you so much for the wisdom, for the stories, for the encouragement to all women entrepreneurs, and to helping recharge the power in their lighthouse so that they can shine more brightly on others. It's really a joy to have you here and to be in business partnership with you this way.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Stacey, and delighted to talk about this topic, because I think we need more women shining their light and figuring out maybe what's been dimming it, so that they can create more of that impact and income they're here to make.
Absolutely. The world needs it right now. And so the more of us who are doing that, and just to be clear with everyone, Grainne and I are more business collaborators, but for me, that is what I feel, partnership. So we're not in business together. Yeah. We are collaborators in business together. Yeah. All right, everyone. Thank you for being with us for another episode. Be watching for the next, another brilliant expert in supporting women entrepreneurs primarily, but we're not exclusive to women, in how to make sure they're in alignment with their values, with what they're selling, with their audience, and with where to plant themselves and how to communicate there so that your audience comes to you rather than you chasing your audience, so that you make more sales, enjoy more satisfaction, achieve more success. Take care, everyone. Shine on.